So my name is Rich Taunt, part of the team at Kaleidoscope, and lovely to welcome you to today's event, all about strategy across a health and care system. Does it ever work? If so, how? We'll give a spoiler alert now that we think the answer to does it ever work might be yes. If it was no, this might be quite a short event, and then we could all get on with the rest of our days. We think it might be yes. If you're hoping that it was going to be no and you would be released after 2 minutes, I'm really sorry, but I hope you can stay with us. You might be wondering, who on earth is Kaleidoscope? Good question. We're a not-for-profit social enterprise. Our mission is to work with others to create a future which is kind, connected and joyful. One of the ways we do that is by providing consultancy services. Consultancy doesn't have to be a dirty word. To bring people together to improve health and care, including a whole range of things to do with both strategy and systems. More on that later on. The people you'll be hearing from this afternoon include this Galactico of stars and me. So you'll be hearing from Adrian, George, Samira, Rob, a little bit from me as we go through as well. We asked you in the registration to give us your general view of ICSs. We gave you some options. We allowed you the full range of things you might want to say. So the results just in, 3% of you said, sorry, what does ICS stand for? I think that's a perfectly legitimate question. Particular welcome if you are from outside health today. 5.8% of you, 6% said, well, it's okay, I suppose. Nice grounded view there. Further 9, ICS is useful but overhyped. Then getting on to more positive territory, 25% of you, ICSs are the future of health and care. Yes, indeed, I think Rob Webster did register 46 times for today's event, which might be part of the answer to that. But the biggest proportion here, ICS is nice idea, but so hard to work in practice. We think this is a pretty good result. Yes, there are grounds for optimism, but let's be aware of the difficulties in making this work. Linked to this, a nice little bit of Adam Grant, author, well worth having a look at if you've yet to come across him, who talks quite a lot about informed optimism. So informed optimism meaning not only looking at the bright side, but means that you don't overlook the bright side. The greatest antidote to fear, grounded hope. So that's what we're doing today. We're doing a bit of grounded hope, but also we're making sure that we don't overlook the bright side as well. So introductions. How are we going to do introductions? We are quite a large group. So what we're going to do, we'll keep this quite snappy if that's all right. We're just going to go around and each of us can come off mute one at a time, and you can just talk for as long as you like about nothing in particular. That's not what we're going to do. No, we're going to use Menti today. So first off, the place I call home is, if you are not featured on this map. Firstly, lovely, thanks so much for joining. But if you want to put yourself in the sea nearest to wherever you are, that might be appropriate. But the place I call home is, thank you very much indeed, everyone, for popping on their little dots. If anyone is joining us from St Ives, it'd be quite nice to get the full Cornish experience. Likewise, Northeast, come on Northeast, and Anglia, that would be quite good. Lovely. Okay, thank you very much indeed. The over-representation of London in British society continues once more. Thank you, everyone. Primarily work for. Who do you work for? Again, just interesting to see who we've got in our virtual room today. So your options as per the order paper. What part of the world are you joining us from today? Other covers all sorts of different things. So apologies if we haven't been able to pop your correct bucket on the list of options. Just give this a little bit more. Great stuff. So range to you from trusts, national bodies, ITBs, place system, great. Lovely to see so many from charities, social enterprises. That's great, as well as other types of provider. That is wonderful. Thank you very much indeed. We can go through this pretty quickly. Now, that leading answer we had about ICS, it's so hard. It's it's the right idea, but it is so hard. Really interested. Your one sentence analysis, diagnosis, thoughts, mullings. Why do you think the ICS idea is so hard to get to work in practice? If you've just joined and are wondering how to get on to menti.com, 4466 1274, 4466 1274. Why is the ICS idea so hard to get to work in practice? Thanks so much for early responses. What we'll be doing with all of these mentioned answers, we'll share them all back. So you'll have all of these, because I think we'll get inundated. No idea of their key goals. Size, not enough focus on building partnerships without purpose. It's not easy. Interoperability, thank you everyone. Complex funding, fair representation, too many organisations with different priorities, number of partners and stakeholders, communication at the top and services on the ground, too complicated, not enough management resources, takes courage to do the right thing. You get this great sense that actually sort of people are going, oh, let me tell you a thing or two. Thank you, everyone. Yes, this is tricky stuff. Key theme for today's session is this is hard because it is genuinely hard. It's not that we're trying to we're missing something really obvious. We're going to get into a lot of this as we go through the session. Thank you, everyone. Oops, let's just go to the next question. Finally, everyone submitted lots of lovely questions beforehand. Thank you very much indeed. We only have an hour. We will finish at 2 today. So if we're going to focus in, we've just given a selection of questions here. If we were going to pick just 2 of these to focus on, which would you most be keen for us to answer later on? So your shortlist here: how have ICSs created intelligent strategies despite the noise all around? What makes a system rather than a collection of organisations called a system? You might think that's the best question, or you may just want me to repeat that tongue twister again and again. How do you get partners to feel responsible? How do you best work with social care stakeholders? Can you simultaneously work to an organisation and system strategy? How can it lead to real change? How can you get busy people to understand why strategy can help them? And the self-help entrant being, how can I be more like Webster, being a pretty popular entrant there. Maybe we'll focus on that. Francis, your question in the chat: yes, absolutely, we will share all of those responses to the last question as well. Okay, thank you. So we've got we will come back to these later on, but what makes a system rather than a collection of organizations called a system? And how do you get partners to feel responsible for delivery of an ICS strategy? We'll certainly come back to. Thank you very much, everyone. That is introduction for today complete. We're going to go on. Why are we talking about system strategy? Of all the things we could be talking about, why are we talking about this? I'm going to pass over to my lovely colleague, George. Hello, George.
Hi, and thanks, Rich, and thanks everyone so much for joining. I'm George Dellal. I've been part of Kaleidoscope for about 5.5 years now and hold a number of roles in the organisation, including leading our work on collaborations and networks, which is my passion. So before we talk about system strategy, let's spend just a moment or two thinking about what a system is. So leading systems theorist, the late Donnella Meadows, defined a system as an interconnected set of elements that's coherently organized in a way that achieves something. So in our current context, we might question how coherently we're able to organize ourselves and our resources, but putting that to aside, I feel that the key word in Meadows' definition is interconnected. And in our current focus, it's interconnected because it's the connections amongst the component parts that dictate how the system functions and what it's able to achieve. In our current context, we're talking about integrated care systems, partnerships of organizations that come together to plan and deliver joined up health and care services and to improve the lives of those people who live and work in that area. And so the purpose of an ICS is in no doubt noble, and everyone, as we just heard from the pre-work question, the most popular response was that it's a good idea but so hard to put in practice. And that's what's going to be our focus for today, thinking about how we can use strategy to develop deliberately and support systems that achieve more than their component parts working in silos. And next slide, please. As Rich mentioned, we're a Kaleidoscope. We offer support to organisations and systems in a range of areas across the sector. As an organisation, two of our key areas of focus are strategy development and effective collaboration. So we were particularly keen to put on this event as system strategy cuts across these two areas of our interest and expertise. And I'll briefly touch on each of these now. So in terms of strategy development, we believe that strategy development is most effective when it can enable the following areas. So focusing purpose and direction. So it can do this through renewing purpose and values. It can provide clarity and for decision makers and decision making, enabling staff to understand how they're part of something bigger than themselves, bigger than any particular team or department, and externally showing and demonstrating values. We also talk about strategy enabling organizations to accelerate their pace of change and by testing new ways of working and fostering ownership across groups. Strategy can also energize culture and relationships, being genuine around what matters most, role modeling values, and strengthening relationships in the process. And strategy can also enable us to listen and understand to those who matter most when it is done effectively. Next slide. In terms of supporting effective collaborations, we found through our research and our experience that effective high-performing collaborations have a clear shared purpose, they focus on building the right culture, and they have the resources and structures to succeed. And we've broken that down further into 8 characteristics, which you can see at the bottom, which can each be measured and developed and worked on either individually or together in groups. Next slide. So some of our keenest participants today might be wondering, you guys at Kaleidoscope just did a session on strategy a couple of months ago. And it's true, and I see several familiar names from that event. So what's different about today's event is that we're focused on system strategy. And to bring out that distinction, let me start by doing a little quiz. So over the next few seconds, we're going to reveal more and more of an image until someone is able to pop into the chat what this is an image of. So we're going to start to build this out. So anyone guess what this is an image of? Make it a little bit bigger. Fingers on buzzers, getting ready to type. Anyone? 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 Yes, thank you. Apologies if I mispronounced your name, but thank you. Jose and Dan, it is indeed Encarta. And for those of you who were not around in 1995, Encarta was one of our first digital encyclopedias. It was funded and developed by Microsoft. It had the brightest tech minds of a generation working on it, and it quickly made physical encyclopedias obsolete. Yeah, anyone remember Encyclopedia Britannica? Huge books that people used to have. Anyway, Encarta came along, put that whole industry out of business. But Encarta itself was put out of business just a few short years later by, and it's kind of hard to believe with hindsight, but it's put out of business by a bunch of volunteers sitting in their living rooms, many of whom were undoubtedly wearing their pajamas. Yes, I am talking about Wikipedia. If you pop to the next slide, Wikipedia put Encarta out of business very quickly. It boasts 4.5 billion words, 59 million pages, 46 million active users, and 120,000 active users editing and submitting content regularly. So why are we talking about Wikipedia at a system strategy event? Well, in 2017, if we go to the next slide, Wikipedia set out their ambitions for 2030. So nothing too surprising about that. Lots of organisations set out their ambitions and strategy. And then in 2020, it set out a set of initiatives and recommendations that they would use in order to meet that strategy. Again, nothing too remarkable there, pretty common amongst many organisations. And what's really important, what really matters, is the level of consultation, what they did in between 2017 and 2020. You can see here that in 2018 they had a Wikimania event. In 2019 there was a Wikimedia Summit and another Wikimania, loads of community conversations. Working groups were set up, more community conversations, and then finally in 2020, their final recommendations were published. So almost a 3-year consultation process there. So we can go to the next slide, please. So that might have sounded a little bit like overkill. But it's not, because Wikipedia understands something fundamental about system strategy and systems working, and that is it's all about membership involvement and connection. And if Wikipedia's strategy is all about making members involved, what does that mean for us in our health and care context? Well, we argue that in a systems context, you can't have a purpose-driven strategy, our first and foremost characteristic of an effective collaboration, without the next 4 characteristics all focused on building the right culture. So partners committed to the purpose and empowered to act. No, Wikipedia gave away decision-making autonomy to those groups. Trust and generous community. Wikipedia recognizes the contribution from the community and does so very deliberately. Leaders who actively span boundaries can cut across organizations and silos. Wikipedia leadership spans and covers numerous disciplines, and they engage across numerous disciplines and use kind of system convenience to connect across as well. And then ways to communicate and convene. So we heard about those summits, those community conversations, those working groups. Indeed, Wikipedia understands the importance of the cultural infrastructure necessary to support and sustain the Wikipedia system. So what this example nicely illustrates is that system strategy is different from organizational strategy. It's not possible without that cultural infrastructure. And that's where we think our focus should be as we develop and implement strategies for nascent ICSs. So I'll hand back to Rich now to introduce our speakers and hopefully get to explore this a little bit further with you all. Thank you.
Oh, lovely. Thank you very much indeed. To say those slides are in the chat. Yes, we're going on to speakers now, but to say I'm so sorely tempted to diverge and actually just have the next 40 minutes on John's experience of selling Encyclopedia Britannica door to door when he was a student, and the people he met along the way. But I suppose we should probably get on with system strategy. So we're joined by 3 wonderful speakers. I'll allow them to introduce themselves. We're first going to hear from Adrian, then Samira, and then Rob. The question, the bit of homework we've set our trio is to say the one thing that they would always do, the one thing that they would always avoid to help a system strategy deliver real change is ... Adrian, I think we're going to start with you. Adrian, are you there? Can we come to you?
Yes, I am. Thanks, Richard. Can you hear me okay?
We can indeed. Adrian, we should make clear that you're fitting us in amidst a sort of a hectic day. So thank you so much indeed for your time with us today. Adrian, over to you.
No problem at all, Richard. I love to be here with you all. So my name's Adrian Hayter. I'm a GP by background, and I was one of the system leaders at the beginning of the Frimley Health and Care System. So one of the kind of founding kind of system leaders in that system. I'm the National Clinical Director for Older People and Integrated Person-Centred Care at NHS England. So so great to be with you all. I've just been actually I've been helping my mum clear her house out, and we've just got rid of a whole box of Encyclopedia Britannicas, so I can recognise the old technology. Really, Richard, in terms of the one thing that I would do, I think when organisations and systems are creating their strategy, they put a lot of effort into having that communication and engagement with partnerships across. And I think for system strategy, I think it's really important that that dialogue really continues, and it's an ongoing dialogue, because those communities that are going to be there and at the end of those strategies will be the communities that we really want to continue to listen to as the strategic plan is kind of played out. So my thing that I would always do is to just continue listening and talking to those communities and the organisations around them. And then the thing I would avoid, and I think this is kind of goes to the heart of how kind of systems are being kind of set up, and the opportunities for integrated care systems in the future, is about kind of resisting that temptation, as you might do within an organisation sometimes, to have a much more hierarchical kind of governance relationship, where you would have a small number of people at the top making decisions, because that can sometimes then railroad how your strategy is kind of panning out. And I think that that for me is the need to create some of that subsidiarity, some of that kind of on the ground kind of arrangements for people to know their communities and to be allowed to deliver across for those communities. And I think as we go forward over the next few years, I think that that's going to become much more important, and it goes beyond kind of a co-production. It's actually kind of, you know, a real partnership across within organisations and with communities.
Adrian, lovely. Thank you very much indeed. We will show wherever we are our appreciation. Adrian, thank you very much indeed. Real or virtual hands raised in applause equally applicable. Adrian, thank you very much indeed for kicking us off. We're going to come straight across to Samira. Good afternoon, Samira.
Hi, for inviting me to be here, and it's a joy to be here half midweek. So my name is Samira. My background is really kind of community development, community engagement, and really looking at developing social movements. So essentially, by definition, I'm a community organizer, but I've worked in the NHS, in local authority, in the community and voluntary sector for over 20 years, and I'm working independently now, still doing the same job, but essentially just working independently. I suppose my role has always been in that space between system and community, because I really think that's a really critical space. I used to define it as a tightrope, but actually it's becoming more of a chasm, which is a positive thing, because lots of people are joining that space to really kind of begin to think about how communities and systems come together to really make sense of things. So the one thing that I always do, I'm a community development worker by background. I'll say always start with conversations with communities and frontline staff, because if the challenges exist in those communities, then the solutions lie there too. So how do we actually kind of create the space and nurture those spaces and actually kind of enable and facilitate those spaces to really help us actually develop things? The second, people at grassroots do integrated care really well. So what can we learn as a system and observe from those conversations and the way they do things and carry things out? I mean, one of the best examples is on Nyaka, who's a community champion and community organizer. And when I asked her, well, why are you involved in the community champion? She said, there's one purpose, and that purpose is for my community to be the best that it can be. Well, as a strategy, if you think about it, that's the best way of actually articulating and defining what a strategy is and what it does. So in terms of clarity of purpose, if we start from that conversation, it really helps us to move to the next stage. What I don't do, I think there is something what I wouldn't do. There is something about the type of conversation, or if you like, the elephant in the room about ICS strategies and narratives that speak to integrated care and really actually kind of bringing services and bringing organizations together or pulling budgets together. I think there is something about the strategy. There's the reality of the narrative of the strategy and the reality of what happens on the ground. Organizations do play to their kind of own silo way of working. There's kind of so many cultures within cultures within cultures, and you can't really actually kind of, unless you begin to address that, it really kind of makes it really difficult to do. And it frustrates the whole process of actually really thinking about how we can develop and deliver integrated care. A brilliant example of Justin, so Justin is, he's a volunteer. He volunteers in the drugs and alcohol service. And I was having a conversation with him, and he said to me, you know what, I'm going to do, as a volunteer, I'm going to do what I'm going to do. And I don't care what anybody else says. And it was very much about the services in terms of how his role as a volunteer working in a drugs and alcohol service. And Justin knows about drugs and alcohol. He was a drug user from the age of 13 to the age of 43. And then he says his way of giving back is actually by working with people and community. He knows what works and doesn't work. And he says, I don't care what they're going to do. They're going to, they can't sack me. I'm a volunteer. I'll go and do something else. So the idea then, how do we actually nurture people like Justin to really kind of help us make sense of what happens? So I think there's something about really how do we address the different cultures within our organization. So when we're talking about an ICS strategy to address health inequalities, we're talking about something else. Just kind of one final point. We were in the very early days when it was still called accountable care organizations. We were kind of doing some community conversations about how do we, and the definition then was very much about pulling budgets, bringing services together and integrating organizations together. And there was a blank look amongst quite a few of the people that I was facilitating conversation with. And I said, so what is the issue? And they said, well, that's your job. Go away and do it. You know, you want to pull budgets together. You want to integrate service, do it. That's your job. Why are you asking us? But if you want to have a different conversation about actually really a different way of thinking based on people, not structures, based on activities, not outcomes and processes, that's a different type of conversation. And we're happy to do that, and we can help you around that. But we can't help you with pulling budgets together. That's your function, that's your job. So what is it? What type of conversation we have with communities is really quite important and critical. But also, how does that manifest itself in our systems, knowing and understanding that our structures are actually quite rigid in the way that they actually kind of operate and actually kind of develop. So I'll just stop there.
Samira, lovely. Thank you very much indeed. We'll show our appreciation. Samira, thank you very much. Great stuff. What we're going to do, we're going to go straight on before coming back for some reflection and questions in just a moment. And Rob, I think we're going to come to you next. Good afternoon, Rob.
Good afternoon, everybody. Hello, my name's Rob. I'm the Chief Exec of NHS West Yorkshire, which is the Integrated Care Board, and I'm the lead Chief Executive for the Health and Care Partnership, which is the ICS across West Yorkshire. It's great to be here today and have this conversation with you all. So the thing that I always do, working in systems and trying to set a strategy, is to find a common point of agreement between every partner who's involved. And that common point of agreement is then what we always come back to. So it tends to be on the basis of what is it we're here to deliver. So we're here to improve outcomes. How do we want to work together in true partnership? What does that look like when it's working well? And what do we believe in? What do we actually believe in? And having those touchstones, you don't do that at the beginning, just at the beginning. You take your time to get that right. Actually, when we started as a sustainability and transformation partnership in 2016, we did spend quite a lot of time on that, and we had a lot of commentary saying, what are they doing? So, well, what are we doing? We're creating the foundation upon which we will succeed. So that common point of agreement, then we come back to all the time. Are we improving outcomes? Is everything in service of that? Are we working together in true partnership? Are we delivering what we believe in? Are we behaving in a way that we believe in? And if we're not, what's the problem? What I would always avoid is seeing cynicism as leadership. So you're surrounded by cynics, and sometimes you can be cynical yourself. So what does that look like? Well, you know, those bloody people in the NHS, they're only ever interested in hospitals and waiting times. you know, they're always banging on about access to a GP or acute hospital waiting times or AD. Actually, you know, we did a big piece of work with the public about what do you want, and what they said was, well, actually, I'd quite like to be able to see a GP quickly. I want my operation. It'd be nice for someone to help me look after me mum, my granny, my son, you know, me as a carer. I want to make sure that if I ring an ambulance, it turns up. I wouldn't mind seeing a dentist as well. So the read across between what public want and what NHS England want is really strong. And then the other way that sort of cynicism comes out is that, you know, well, you're just focusing on the hospital when you're thinking about waiting times as ever. Well, actually, you're not, because the reason that people are waiting varies, and the reason that people are waiting is usually driven by a raft of issues to do with inequality, structural stigma, racism, poverty, and all sorts of other issues, which is what ICSs are about, you know, addressing some of those issues. So I try and create a culture whereby we're probing and realistic and asking the right questions, but we shouldn't fall into the cynical trap of believing that we've done all this before because the context is different. We've done all this before because we've had SHAs or RHAs or regional office or DHSCs, depending on how long you've been in the system, because this is a novel construct and this is a very different context. So that's what I always try and avoid doing. And when you get that right, you get the right kind of culture. I think we heard already from the great work that Rich and the team have done, that George was talking about earlier, the right sort of ambitions that are shared, you get the right culture, and you start to make a real difference in people's lives.
Lovely. Rob, thank you very much indeed. We'll once more show our appreciation. Thank you very much, Rob. It's also a very clever device, Rob, to make sure that no one is allowed to be cynical about what you've said, because then it's just falling into the trap. Thank you very much, all three. We're going to give you a question, please. A question. We're going to answer some of your questions, but before we do, just reflecting on what you heard from Adrian, Samira, and Rob, what got you nodding your head most vigorously? If you don't mind starting your response with A1, go on. That just helps us decipher the chat a bit afterwards. That'd be great. But just what got you nodding your head most vigorously, and why? Belinda, Rachel, thanks for kicking us off. The cynicism comment, absolutely not driving action. Going back again to sort of what we started off in terms of being an informed optimist isn't about only thinking about the good stuff, but it's not. It's make sure you combine the hope with the realism. Working citizens and communities, lovely. How we overcome citizen. Sarah, thank you very much for using A1. Culture piece, so hard to get traction when it leads to often focused on activities. Thank you. Mark, community focus, great stuff. Yeah, Dan, lovely point about how we're honest about addressing our behaviour. It's very easy to sign up to lots of this stuff and then disown it the moment you walk out of the room. So thanks. More than co-production, to partnership. Great stuff. Thank you very much indeed. What we're going to do is just let that burble away. So please do continuing responding to this one, but also really welcome sort of what did really resonate for you, what sort of got you, what particularly linked with work you might be doing in your area, or some of the sort of challenges you're coming up against. Mira, hello Mira. Communities want to talk about people and services, not pooling budgets and organisational structures. I think as a person who has probably spent more than enough time in my career past talking about structures, we can forget that it's pretty uninteresting to most other people. Lovely, thank you. Let's come back to some of those questions. So please do continue on. But thanks again just for those voting at the beginning. So let's start with this sort of foundational one. But actually, how do we really know what makes a system, rather than just a collection of organisations called a system? Why don't we go down the line in the way we started off? So Adrian, do you want to kick us off? What makes a system rather than a collection of organisations called a system?
So I think Richard, in terms of a system, I think a system is that I like to think about it as not this kind of pyramid that you've got with people at the bottom and then people at the top. I think it's a kind of a flat hierarchy with networks which intermesh across. And I think the power of that is that people can organize themselves into organizations, but actually it goes beyond the organizations and much more deeply into the communities. And when you actually take the time to look below the organization and into the communities, what you see is the assets within those communities, which are more, which gives more strength to the whole collection of ideas. So for me, it's kind of getting deeper down beyond organizations and down into communities to be able to think about all the assets that might occur within those communities. And a lot of those are hidden from organizations, and people don't notice them. And so for me, that's the way that we can really know and understand systems. So less hierarchical, more networked, more collaborative, as we'll be talking about, and more integrated and within the depth of communities.
Adrian, lovely, thank you. It also makes me realise there's probably a dance move in that in terms of sort of moving from system to organisation to system. Lovely, thank you. What we might do, Samira, do you want to come in on that? I'm particularly interested in your point about how we learn from grassroots communities. And then Rob, we might come to you in terms of that next question about how do we get partners to feel responsible for delivery. Samira, so what can we learn? What can we take from grassroots access working as a system rather than just a collection of individuals and groups?
Yeah, so I suppose just going back to COVID and how community mobilized to actually come together and support us as an organization. They're completely organized from the perspective of people in their communities and how vulnerable they were. They didn't start with a structure. I mean, I always say Gold Command started in the community before it actually kind of started in our system and our structures, because they do have that sense of clarity of purpose in terms of what they want to do and how they want to develop. They also know their numbers, their neighbors, they know their family, they know the community that they live in. So they make sense of that. I think there is something just to kind of go back in terms of how we met. The idea is not that the solutions lie just solely in community. The solutions lie when you bring the two together, when you actually kind of bring the skills and the expertise that happen in our system with community and actually negotiate that process. And in doing that, you do need to actually get both community leaders and system leaders to move beyond their organizational boundaries and step into the space that actually kind of, and that's a brave space and it's a risky space, both for faith and community leaders who say, are they colluding with the system in increasing health inequalities, or some system leaders who take a lot of risks. But we do have some great examples. We've got Adrian, we've got Rob, we've got some people outside of Donna Hall, certainly the experience of Grenfell in terms of actually kind of how, Robin, who was the chief operating officer, Fatima, who's a community leader, but also a therapist, how people move beyond their organizational boundaries to occupy that space and make sense of things.
Samira, lovely, thank you. We'll come to Rob in one second, but Samira, just to stick on that point, if it's okay. I'm sure there are lots of people on the call who are thinking along the lines of, yeah, that sounds great, but we just, we've got so much else to worry about. How do we create the tie? How do we make this a priority? What's your advice to people in terms of how you make these sorts of conversations ones which the whole organization wants to invest in?
Well, it's just the framing of the challenge. You have to look at your community as part of your wider workforce. You are not able to address the challenges unless you begin to actually think about your wider workforce. In areas, in some areas you've got 2.2 million in an ICS people workforce. So you need to think about actually not the added stress, but also the opportunity for actually kind of creating long-term sustainable change. What we do in our system is fix problems. What happens in the community is actually that's where health happens. So how do we actually begin to really kind of support people so that they don't there isn't that a kind of revolving door of people coming in, and then we wonder why people turn up at our doorsteps. I mean, they turn up because there's nowhere else to turn up.
It's really lovely. And I think for all we love to celebrate the NHS's 75th birthday, health and communities did exist before the NHS, I think there were people before the NHS. Rob may wish to confirm. Rob, do you want to come in on this? Well, similar points, but this particular question about how do you make sure that partners feel responsible for delivery of a system strategy?
Well, I'll try and link them together, really. So I think this point about system, we're in a system now. You're always been in a system. You're either conscious of the system and how it works, or you're not. To Samira's point, the people who see the system working or not are the patients, parents, carers who are on the end of it. And if you want to know whether it's working, just ask. And what they'll tell you is, what works really well and what is incredibly frustrating and difficult and they wish would change. So should we have systems? You can't not have a system because you're in it. So that's my first point. I think the second thing is good systems where partners own the ambitions are ones where I think you've created those common points of agreement between where are we going, how are we getting there, how is it governed, and you've got a mutual interest and mutual accountability in delivery. So people get into a sort of system versus organisation, which is a redundant philosophical trap. I think you need good organisations and a good system. And when you've got partners within the system working together, they can see the contribution that they make to your overall goal because you're measuring it, you've agreed it. They come together frequently to challenge each other through mutual accountability and solve problems, as Samira talked about. And they do things outside their own interest. So I'll give you a couple of examples. So in West Yorkshire, a couple of years ago, the hospital trusts gave up £14 million mid-year to pay social care staff in care homes and domiciliary care providers the living wage early because Amazon had opened warehouses in West and South Yorkshire and were paying £1,000 sign-on fee. And they recognised that what we needed to do was to retain as many staff as possible in those domiciliary care institutions. That's people going outside their own interests in the pursuit of something bigger, but also has a connection to their business because they see they're part of a system. So I think that's what it looks like. And you get the ownership of that through leadership, collaboration, constant challenge, and spending a lot of time together. So that's what I would say. And making sure that you take all of those agreements. You do have some structural work, but you also have good governance, good agreements that go through all of the arrangements in public. And once you start to see the difference that you're making, it becomes easier and easier to own what's going on.
Rob, lovely. Thank you very much indeed. Well, let's stick with that then in terms of this question which we've got around how can ICS create intelligent strategies despite the noise going on all around them, without asking you to share your conversations with national bodies and regional teams and other such lovely interactions in your day, I'm sure, Rob. How do you keep focused as a system on what you've collectively agreed when there's so much happening sort of out of your control, which can impact on your ability to do what you really want to as a system?
So I think you've got to do the work once. I mean, that's one of our maxims, do the work once and don't be the checker for the checkers. So as an ICS, we're a system, and as an integrated care board, we facilitate change and improvement through engagement, co-production, and all of those things that we've talked about already. I don't need to be running the acute hospitals, the mental health providers, the GPs. They do it themselves. They've got some fantastic people. By the same token, we have people in councils, people in trusts who have an interest in work, which they can run for everybody in the system. So the first thing is to maximise our capacity by allowing people to lead on behalf of the system and letting people lead their organisations without interfering. I think the second thing is to recognise it's perfectly valid in a politically funded system, a publicly funded system, which is politically very hot, to be accountable to a regulator. It's okay. And actually, as I've described, the kind of things that they're interested in is exactly the kind of things that we're interested in. And they've got quite a lot of good things to provide us support for, some brilliant work on a range of improvements and evidence around improvements, good practice sharing, etc. And then I think the third thing is to be really crystal clear. I think Steve Black asked in the chat what our ICS is for. Well, we've got a range of measures for the things we're held to account to nationally around weighting, etc. We've also got a range of measures around the things that we're interested in: race equity, inequalities, addressing inequalities for people with learning disabilities, early detection of cancer, antimicrobial resistance, etc. So we're measuring and monitoring both. And I think if you can do that, you maintain the momentum of the people who are leading because they want to be involved in it.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Such is the sort of the richness of this topic. We're supposed to go on for an hour, but we could probably extend it to about 4 days. If anyone's got 4 days free in their calendar, we could just keep on going. Maybe we've got other things to do. Let's move it on just one little bit, please. So what we'd love is so we've got 100 people on this call, just under now, which is wonderful, and a whole wealth of experience. So just really, so from your experience in working around these topics about system workings, about trying to get strategies to work for systems, what one practical tip, however small it might be, would you recommend to others? So from your experience, what one practical tip would you recommend to others? Lovely, thank you for these already coming through. Again, so everything in the chat we will write up, we'll return back to you. So don't worry about anything getting lost. Landra's system giving illusion of there's one system or indeed one community. Lovely, thank you. Building trust, recognize that we're the system. It's not them, us, really nicely put. How we use language and behaviors here. Yeah, and I think one of the things which we see a lot in our work is it is absolutely normal when you have people working together from different perspectives, different cultures, different backgrounds, you're going to talk different languages. And actually creating that common language is part of that common purpose, that common identity. But coming back to Rob's point, that requires time. And you will have people looking on going, what are you doing? And it's like, we're doing the real work. What are you doing? Possibly don't say that. Spending time with another organisation system. Thank you. Respecting difference, building relationships. No shortcut for engagement. You have to mean it and do it. Thank you. Steve, yeah, focus on a handful of key goals, prepared to stop some things to free time for the important things. Thank you very much, everyone. We're going to come back just to our panel. Time's against us. We've sort of raced through. So really interesting. We'll come to Adrian, then Samira, then Rob. So 2 parts to this. One is what closing thoughts, what closing bit of advice would you like to leave others with before we close? But second, how hopeful are you feeling? How hopeful are you feeling? We go through loops within the NHS of setting something up and getting very excited and then getting distracted and doing something else. How hopeful are you feeling about how systems develop in health and care over the next few years? So closing reflection and how hopeful are you feeling? Adrian, to kick us off.
Great. So I think my closing reflection would be the really that someone put in the chat trust. Trust at all levels in the system, or between organisations, trust between communities and leaders. That's really important, and taking time to develop that, and relationships don't develop straight away. They need some support in being able to do that. So for me, it's taking the time, build the trust, build the relationships, and then you'll deliver the outcomes. For me, Richard, I'm really optimistic. This is only a year into integrated care systems. A lot of systems have taken the time in the previous 5 years to start to develop those relationships and trust, and you can see the early shoots of that in terms of how outcomes are being delivered in places like Rob's system and several others. And so I'm as you know, an optimistic person by nature, but also there's some good evidence to say that those green shoots are shooting up.
Adrian, thank you very much indeed. Let's come to Samira. Samira, a closing reflection and where you stand on the hopeometer.
So I'm hopeful. I'm an optimist, and I think, and I've worked in the area of community development for a long time. So I think there is a real more honest conversations about actually the role that communities can play, but also kind of there are conversations happening about handing power over to communities so that they can do what they do really well. So I'm really hopeful about that, and I think ICSs could provide that opportunity to really do that in a way that actually a lot of the previous restructures haven't done it to such an extent. By the way, I've been through every 3-letter acronym restructure in the NHS that you can think of. So I know that's just the nature of organisations. I think just in terms of how some closing reflections, maybe some of the things that I always go back to in terms of what makes a good plan, what makes a good strategy. There's kind of some principles around actually if the starting point, if the ambition and some of the assumptions are actually kind of people always do more when they decide for themselves. So our role is to really create spaces to do that. And that's the only way we can actually kind of deliver the changes. There's something about community and faith spaces, recognizing and investing in community and faith spaces as the lifeblood of local action, because we've seen time and again how they've actually come and mobilize and support that. There's something about recognizing, and I know we don't talk enough about it at the moment, but that race and racism has a negative impact on health, and we really need to recognize it and remember and continue and be persistent in thinking about it as a public health issue. We really need to continue with that. And the final one, just about measuring what people value, and the tools that we use to measure value. So really giving the stories that we hear equal value as opposed to just data. So I'm a real fan of data and looking at evidence, but also stories are a real research and evidence-based tools for really kind of making sense. And also just kind of thinking about some things that may be important to us within a system that we need to measure, but they may actually kind of not be that important for people. So how do we negotiate with them what they value, and how do we actually use those as outcomes in themselves?
Lovely. Samira, thank you very much indeed. The whole webinar we could go into in terms of the value of stories and storytelling within change of any sort, and particularly systems change. Lovely. Rob, closing reflection, optimism level.
Yeah, so thank you for everyone for the conversation. It's always leaves me wanting to have further conversations with a lot of people and pinch their ideas and try and do them as well. I think the first reflection I would have is that what I always try and build on is the fact that you're not starting from scratch. And just because something becomes a national diktat or fad doesn't mean it suddenly becomes important in a way that it wasn't before. So a really good example would be health and wellbeing boards, health and wellbeing strategies built on joint strategic needs assessments, which have been a statutory requirement since 2012. So you've got a system strategy already in the places within which people live, and the big drivers of inequality, the inequity faced by people of colour, the issues that we face in our health and care system about place. So we in West Yorkshire, we use the place strategies from the beginning to say, we've got to start here. What more could we do if we work together at a bigger level to collaborate, and if we were to do that in partnership, true partnership, which valued the contribution of every partner, we maybe get somewhere. So you're never starting from scratch, and if you think you are, you're just going to hack off everybody who's been around this roundabout lots of times before, being asked the same questions if they're in the community or a GP or a counsellor and all that sort of stuff. So use the assets that are there because they're brilliant. I think how hopeful am I? Well, I am concerned that there are some substantial risks ahead of us, and we are entering a difficult period. I think we're already in a difficult period, but we're entering a difficult period for integrated care systems and integrated care. I think there are a lot of people who comment that, what are they for? The really difficult, complicated things. And they see them through an organisational lens. Integrated care systems are system. You need system thinking. it's a novel approach to delivering change. Integrated care boards are organisations in that system, so people need to clock that and stick with it, because the solutions to the problems we face are in systems and good organisations. So that, and the political turmoil we're in, means that I'm a bit worried. I am hopeful though, because I don't think, even if you change the structures and the organisations, you still need a system approach to tackling the issues. And I think we've developed enough of a movement of people and leaders whose minds are being changed for this to persist. So I'm concerned and hopeful.
My glass is both half full, and it's also half empty.
It's half full, it's just a bit cracked.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Last bits and pieces from us before we close, and we will close in just a couple of minutes. Our last question for you. We're really interested. Hopefully this has been a useful space in terms of practical tips, tricks, insights to help you in whatever part of the health and care wider system you may even be, beyond health and care, but engaged and interested in these thoughts. What's been the most useful sort of nugget which you have heard today? So when you bump into someone in the corridor and went, "What were you doing for an hour?" You can say, "Great, I was on this webinar and this is what I picked up." So last question for you. The most useful tip, insight, or observation you heard today, which you'll be passing on to other colleagues. To say once again, thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Thank you, Rob, Samira, Adrian, and George, for offering such insight. Again, we will be taking everything which we've heard both through the Menti and through the chat, and we'll find a way to play that back to you. We've been recording today. We'll be sharing that recording and the slides and the chat all back with you, so you get a complete sort of goodie bag of mementos from our time together. Thank you for these answers coming through on C1. Please continue to do so. Last formalities from us. We do this sort of stuff if we can help, either in terms of strategy development or system development. Please do get in touch. A whole range of ways in which we currently and previously work with a whole host of people across both England, but also into Scotland and Wales as well. So please do get in contact if anything here has resonated and you feel like we could do with a conversation. Please do continue. If helpful to have a coffee to discuss anything we talked about today, that'd be lovely. We have a newsletter if you want to keep up to date. We have more events coming up in the future. Info on the website. There is also going to be an evaluation form in the chat in 1 second, which would be great if you could spend 2 minutes to fill that in. We'd be hugely appreciative. It is 2 o'clock. Thank you for the C1s continuing to come through, but we will release you to get on with your days. Thank you so much again for joining. Thank you for the speakers. Thank you for your time. And we hope to see you on another Kaleidoscope event in the future. Thanks very much.